What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me here on episode 12 of the 90 Feet from Home Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Joe Orico. You guys can check me out over on Twitter at Joe Orico99. That's where I share out all of my new work, podcasts, articles, threads that go out right onto Twitter. You guys can check all that out at Joe Orico99. We got a special one. We got a very fun one in store tonight. I'm talking with an old friend who has not been on the show. Well, this is a new show, actually, so he's never been on this one, but I haven't talked with him on a podcast in quite a while. You're familiar with his work over at Triple Play Fantasy and a few other places throughout the years. We're going to let him talk about what he's got going on right now. I know he's going to be making a return to the Triple Play podcast very soon. It's my good friend David Mendelson, who you can find over on Twitter at dmendy02. Mendy, brother, it's great to catch up with you. How you been?
I've been good, man. Thanks for having me on your new show, your new venture. I'm pumped for you. We were talking pre-show, and I already know all the people will be flocking over here and checking out this great new podcast. But man, things have been good. They've been very busy, but as you mentioned, get back in the grind, the fantasy baseball grind, starting this week here with actually, this is the first pod I've done in a couple months. Kind of dusting off the mic here, and pumped to do it with you, my friend.
Oh, it's always great. Yeah, I put on a Triple Play show recently, and I heard the dulcet tones of Marty Tallman hosting the podcast. So I was thinking, what's going on here? But you are going to be back behind the mic, you said, next week. So that's very cool. If you're not familiar with the Triple Play Fantasy Baseball podcast, you should be checking it out. That feed is filled with goodies. Also got the Triple Play Fantasy Baseball Beat, which is a fantastic show as well. But Mendy, how have your teams looked so far? What's going on through the first third of this? I think today was actually the 1/3 mark of the season. How are the teams looking?
I'd say pretty mixed overall. Over the last few years, I've steadily dropped some leagues because I was a little overwhelmed. I think I was up to like close to 20 a few years ago, and I've steadily cut down. But I would say overall, I'm kind of anywhere from like second to 10th. I'm not winning any leagues, but I'm also not losing any leagues. So, I guess you're kind of good and bad in that sense. But for the most part, with the dropping of some of the leagues, I've done a lot better job of being patient with Fab, picking up players on the wire with slower starts when people are getting frustrated with them, playing the matchups better, just because that's not as overwhelming to you can kind of and easier to manage your teams and see who's out on the wire than all the, in a lot less of these leagues. And doing the one Fab league now has really kind of had me locking into not feeling too stretched thin with that. So I feel like I've been playing the game within the game a lot better this year, and I think the results have been better than the last couple years for me.
Fab is still the one, well, not the one thing, but it's probably the main thing for me where I'm still behind the curve a little bit. This is my second year properly getting into it, like NFBC Fab. I've done Yahoo Fab leagues where it's more casual, $100 Fab, but it's a lot different in NFBC leagues, like in TGFBI, which I know some people, it's a free league, but it's still fairly competitive. Mike Trout was dropped in one of the leagues, in my league, and I bid $241 on him, and the runner-up bid was $47. So there are still some things to work through. I wasn't very efficient. I thought it would be a bidding frenzy on him, considering like he was starting to ramp up again, but blew a lot of money there. Fab is definitely something where I'm going to need to get better with it. Any massive pickups for you? Did you get a Jared Jones at the beginning of the year, or any massive game changers like that to start the season for you?
I got Jack Flaherty off the
Uh,
wire. He was dropped after one of his clunkers in the beginning of the year. I picked up Brady Singer as well. He's been fairly decent, not like amazing, but he's been a stable arm for the most part. I missed out on Skeens. He got picked up. This was obviously a non-fab league on NFBC because you can't pick up guys that weren't drafted. But I missed out on Skeens because one of the guys picked him up like a month before he was called up and just held on to him. Um, I missed out on Jared Jones as well. So those were two guys I wish I got. But overall, I picked up a few of these guys. I missed out on Hulk because someone outbid me in Fab for him when I was trying to get him when he was dropped weirdly early on too. But no, those are probably the biggest ones I would say. But there's been a lot of those guys this year. So people that didn't draft pitcher early, they're really benefiting this year.
I looked today and I couldn't believe it, but Hauk was leading the American League in ERA. I think it may have been the majors. I can't remember if I had the Major League or just American League filter on, but Tanner Hauk has shocked a lot of people. There's been quite a few pitchers that have shocked me, and I do want to talk about that a little bit later on. But I do want to talk about Ronald Acuna Jr. because I put it off on the show earlier, and I was thinking, it's kind of crazy to do a show immediately after and not talk Acuna, but I wanted to save it for you here. This is brutal. This is terrible for baseball. It's terrible for fantasy, for Braves fans, for everybody. There's nobody really that benefits from this except maybe Michael Harris, who maybe gets up to the top of the order. But even then, like, I don't know that anybody nobody's happy about this for sure. The question is now, is this going to change the course of his career? I heard Eric Cross invoke the name of Derrick Rose the other day on the Tool Shed pod and think that maybe, after you have a couple knee injuries, both knees now, this could be something that really changes the course of his career. Now, after his previous knee injury, he came back and stole 73 bases and had one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen. So he's probably not somebody where we can use the usual benchmarks for in terms of what we can expect. But where do we think Acuna is going to land once this comes back? Is he going to be able to get back to that first round number one type of best player in baseball, or is this a situation where we're probably going to be robbed of what could be because of the injuries at this point? What's your opinion on this, David?
Man, it's so sad for baseball, man. Like to have like one of your most electrifying players go down for the second time in 3 years. Uh, I was this was probably out of everything on the show sheet. This is the thing I spent the most time on. Just I was curious. Just like, is there been another MLB player that's had an ACL tear in both their knees? The only thing I could find was even somewhat recently Royce Lewis, but he tore it in the same knee. A lot of there you'll see one ACL tear, but the two is extremely rare. They said I was reading an article earlier today, and they said it only affects like 6% of major league players where they get a torn ACL because it's a different sport than basketball and football. The amount of exertion and the sudden quickness and things. It's not like a fast twitch sport in much when you're playing defense and running. So like it doesn't happen as often. But there was a great article that Stefania Bell put out that she was talking about it, and she said there is obviously not a lot of data, but she said there's, from what she was able to gather, there's a 12% decrease in production when it is your rear leg that has the torn ACL, which was what he tore in 2021. And the next year you saw that 119 games, 15 homers, 59 RBIs, a 266 batting average, 29 steals. For him, that's obviously not Acuna-like numbers. And then he tore his left knee ACL. She said actually that in the past that's been a 6% increase in production, I guess because it's not the loading leg and it doesn't affect it quite as much. Now, so she said those are the numbers in terms of which side the ACL is torn in terms of the data. And she also lists that he tore his ACL last time playing in the field. This time he tore his ACL running the base paths. So could you say that technically his actual aggressiveness, will he still be able to be an athlete, athletic? Yes, is what she was saying. Is there the mental part of it now where it's like you tore your ACL running the bases, and now after tearing 2 ACLs that you might be a little bit more hesitant to steal? Your team, knowing how good your bat is, might not want you to steal as much. I think there's the mental part that he has to get over. Where it stands today in terms of where he's going to be drafted, I heard Chris Towers. Wasn't able to fact check this, but he had mentioned that he was kind of like a early second round pick after his first ACL tear. I kind of feel like he's going to settle in kind of as like a early to mid second round pick, because right now they're projecting that he'll be back for the start of the 2025 season. But I would have to think that the stolen bases are definitely going to take a hit, even if they're 30, which is good, but that's less than half of what he stole a year ago. So I think you just have to temper your stolen base expectations with him. But in terms of his, hitting production, that I'm not as concerned about, combining Stefania's research with I think he's just that dynamic of a player.
Yeah, I think we may see the Mike Trout trajectory here of you're a massive base stealer in your early 20s, and then as some injuries crop up, he doesn't need to steal to be productive. He showed us he can hit 340 and hit 40 home runs, or 337, whatever it was. So it's not like he needs that as part of his game. And maybe if he just focuses more on the hitting side and doesn't worry about the running, then maybe he'll even improve those parts of his game. We saw Mike Trout once he cut down on the speed. I think there was a couple of his peak years there where he only had a couple, 2, 3 stolen bases or whatever it is. So it's not necessarily the end or anything like that for sure of his stolen base days, but I'm not exactly optimistic. And this will be an interesting situation. You mentioned going into next year. I think second round does make a lot of sense because that's when they generally start to take the chances. We saw it this year with Ellie De La Cruz. People are willing to take a chance in the second round, and Ellie has panned out so far. But I think your first rounder, you don't really want to be taking that chance. And I think his minimum pick, when we look at NFBC drafts next year, he might have a minimum pick of 14 or 13 or something. Somebody might take the chance just because they can't help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that risk. There is a definite risk. Maybe he is not playing, like you said. Maybe he's taking it a little easier in the field and maybe in every aspect. Maybe even just with the swings, he takes it a little. I don't know. Like you said, it can get into your head when you have those injuries and you want to do everything you can to stay on the field. And sometimes those little adjustments can actually end up hurting you more. So this will be an interesting one. I don't have a fully formed opinion on next year, but I think if I'm sitting there at pick 25 or so and Acuna's sitting there and we know he's fully healthy getting into the year, it'll probably be tough to pass him up, I would imagine, just if you think about the potential number one overall player in the second round. I think that does make sense if people even let him get to the second round, because we see crazy hype all the time. If he hits a few homers, if he's stealing bases in spring, then he's going in the first round probably. That's just usually how this works. But it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a very sad situation. The Braves have now lost Strider and Acuna, and we have not even hit June. It's funny. I had a little friendly bet with Ariel Cohen heading into the season about Acuna's batting average and about Strider's ERA because I was putting together projections before the year and I was tapping him for some advice, the ATC guy, and we made a couple of bets and they were both only going to be valid if I think it was 80 games played for Acuna and 80 innings pitched for Strider. So they're both null and void before we've even hit June here. So it definitely is a shitty situation to say the least. But I do want to talk about Shohei Ohtani as
Yeah.
well here. Now, this isn't the situation where I'm terribly concerned, but I've seen it. Well, he's sitting today, and I've seen it suggested on Dodgers Twitter and Twitter in general that he might require an IL stint here because he's now got a hamstring strain. How worried are we here? As of right now, I think he's the number one player overall. 13 homers, 13 steals. He's batting 336. Is this going to be something that affects him? And there's also the fact of he's going to eventually start to rehab the arm side of things, and it will be a little bit more complicated as the year goes on. The Dodgers will probably be, very much in a playoff spot by the time September comes around. When it's head-to-head playoff time, Ohtani might not be fully, operating at full cylinders there. So, is this a situation where we're worried at all? Would you be looking to trade him in a trading league, head-to-head specifically? Any real worry here long term with Ohtani and the hamstring?
I would lie if I didn't say a little bit because it's definitely affected him at the plate. Over his last 7 games, he's hitting 250, 300, 357. His triple slash, 4 home runs, or 4 runs, 7 hits, no home runs, and 3 RBIs, 2 steals, and 6 strikeouts. So, like, the production isn't Shohei Ohtani like. And the one thing that's scary to me is soft tissue injuries with athletes because those injuries tend to linger. And hamstrings are the biggest culprit of that. And in football, it's like a death sentence if you see an athlete get a hamstring injury because every time they try to run, then they start affects them. And we just saw that in basketball with Tyrese Halliburton, who was injured it in January. He missed 10 games, and then it just happened again in the playoffs, and he misses the last 2 playoff games. So hamstring injuries for athletes are a big deal, and whether they give him the IL stint, but it's the minimum, or they don't give him the IL stint, this is something that I feel like could affect him the rest of the season, assuming they don't give him a long enough time to rest it. That to me is like maybe doesn't impact him as much on the plate. Maybe, this is just a cold stretch he's going through. But I have to wonder if you were expecting 30 to 40 steals from Ohtani, if you have to temper those expectations just a little bit for him on that side. In terms of trading him, it'd be hard for me because I think if you tried to trade him now, you wouldn't be getting nearly fair value because everybody'd be like, what's like, oh, they're panicking. And I'm not going to offer anything what would be a decent trade. So I think if you have Ohtani, you just got to hold him right now and just hope that, whether it's an IL stint and it gets it cleared up or that his overall just production is just going to be that good, that it doesn't matter if he's not getting as many steals as you would like, because it's Shohei Ohtani everywhere else. So I'm a little worried, but I think he's still going to be a stud. Just maybe temper the expectation with stolen bases right now.
I think that's fair. And in terms of like what people were expecting, he had 20 last year. The fact that he already has 13 means that we're, even if he is taking it easy, probably going to get to at least 20. So I think people can rest easy
Yeah.
knowing that it's not like he's going to have 4 steals this year or something. Like, you're going to at least get what
Right.
you were expecting there, probably. And everywhere else should probably be fine. I just think that this might be a peak time. And if you can potentially turn him into like a Jose Ramirez type, or if you're getting a first round player back for him, that would kind of be where I'm coming from. I just
Mhm.
worry about how they're going to use him down the stretch. And they're going to probably want to take it easy, considering he is locked up there for the rest of his career. And they're not going to want to take massive chances in year one. So we might see, if they have 100 wins heading into the final month of the year, they're not, they're giving him every other day off or something. I just worry for head-to-head playoff, but I wouldn't be selling him at a discount. Like, this is not a situation where you're panic selling Ohtani or nothing even close to that. Just something to keep an eye on here. And hamstrings are tricky, like you said. Hamstrings, backs. There's certain injuries where you come back, but you might not be 100%, and you never really know. So I'm a little bit worried, but I think I'm not overly concerned here where we're selling him or anything like that, unless you're getting a first round player in return. I think that'd be the only way I would sell him. Is that fair? If you're getting back like a J Ram, would you trade him for a J Ram or maybe a Harper or somebody like that?
Would you trade him straight up for Julio Rodriguez, who had been cold up until the last couple days?
That's an interesting one. Going forward, rest of season, who would you prefer? Man, that is actually really tricky. That might be poll worthy. I think it's probably Ohtani, but I wouldn't fault anybody for taking Julio. Like, we know he's going to get going. We know, my buddy in my home league, Mike, who has Julio, was saying the other day, this is just ridiculous. Like, what am I even doing? And then, of course, that night he had a couple steals and hit a home run. But yeah, it's been brutal. But if you're acquiring, this is something like, I was talking about Randy Rosarena on a show recently, and if you're acquiring Randy Rosarena, the 150 batting average so far, you don't have to take any of that. None of what he's done
Yeah.
to this point affects you. So you're just looking going forward. None of Julio's slumps, if you're acquiring him, likely to affect him. Like, he might have a bad week, but he's probably, fully ready to go at this point. Where with Ohtani, there might be some lingering troubles. I think I'd take Ohtani, but it's pretty damn close, honestly. Where would you go on that one?
I think I'd go Ohtani as well. It's funny just because J-Rod, I feel like at the end of the year, his end of year numbers look great, but it's a lot more of a roller coaster than what you should get for most first round picks. And if it works out where like the worst of him is kind of at this point done, and like he'll have bad stretches, but not as bad as what he's gone through, then you're getting a huge player here. And he's probably he was a great buy low up until this past weekend. But yeah, I still think at the end of the day, I would rather go Ohtani. But it's definitely close for sure.
Yeah. Public perception of Julio has been pretty bad. You might, if you were going to do this, you might be able to trade Ohtani for Julio plus and get a little side piece potentially, although maybe not, depending on how closely people pay attention to things. But it
Mhm.
is interesting, the thought of potentially moving off of these star players. When I had Ryan Bloomfield on a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Ellie and moving on from Ellie. And when the line comes where you probably should, if you have enough stolen bases accumulated already, then those, if he gets 100 stolen bases, then stolen base 70 through 100 probably is not helping you too much in a roto league. So it's interesting to talk about potentially moving off of star players. And that's kind of a segue into the next guy I want to talk about, Gerrit Cole, here, because he is going to face live hitters again. So I think he faced them either today or yesterday. You guys are listening to this likely on Wednesday. So he's going to face live hitters again on Thursday, and this will be the third time as he ramps up. I'm guessing we're not too far away from Gerrit Cole coming back, and that's going to lead to a big problem. Maybe not a big, it's a good problem to have for the Yankees, but it will lead to somebody, I think, having to leave the rotation. And the Yankees rotation, I think, has kind of flown under the radar to some degree, but these guys have 4 pitchers with an ERA below 3, and the one who's above 3 is at 3.29. So we got Carlos Rodon at 2.95, Marcus Stroman at 2.76, Clark Schmidt 2.52, Luis Heel, who's looking like a potential Cy Young candidate, at 2.11. And then, bringing up the rear with a 3.29 ERA is nasty Nestor Cortez. I've heard it suggested, and I'm pretty sure Ken Rosenthal said it, that Luis Heel might be leaving the rotation once Cole comes back, which would kind of be crazy after what we've seen. But somebody's going to have to go likely. I don't see the Yankees going 6-man here. Two-part question. What are your thoughts on Cole? And then what happens in the rotation? With the Cole part, is it better now to capitalize on what might be some hype and sell him before the elbow potentially has problems down the line? Or are you holding? Like, this is kind of a convoluted question, but how do we assess the Yankees rotation at this point?
Man, it's tough. Who would have thought the New York Yankees would have really good pitching right now?
Yeah.
You know, like it's been as long as I can remember that they've needed pitching, and now they have too much of it. So like Gerrit Cole, in terms of the first part of your question, like you want to say his value's as high as it could be right now because people are very excited for him coming back, but it definitely if he comes back and he goes 2 or 3 outings where he looks like Gerrit Cole. So in terms of with Gerrit Cole, if I have him, I'm holding him and then waiting for a couple really good starts and then just kind of floating to see what I could get. If I'm trying to acquire Gerrit Cole, I'm trying to do it now because I think once he goes out there, I think he is going to look like the Gerrit Cole we're expecting. And at that point, his value is only going to go up. So that's kind of where I stand with him. In terms of the like rotation, though, it's not an easy fix because, like with the Phillies, Spencer Turnbull was the easy guy to take out of the rotation when they had this problem. But like you mentioned, like Nestor Cortez, a 2.85 expected ERA, 2.15 expected batting average, career low walk rate, sub 6%, like great numbers across the board. Marcus Stroman, he would be to me the guy that should go because obviously his last 3 starts, 19.1 innings pitched, 1 earned run over that time with 13 strikeouts. The production in there recently, but he's giving up a lot of hard contact. His expected ERA is nearly 2 runs higher right now than his actual ERA. I think he's really just outperforming his peripherals right now, and I think he's due for regression. But the problem with Marcus Stroman is he is very high pedigree, and you're not putting Marcus Stroman in your bullpen, so he can't go. Then you have Carlos Rodon, who's making a crazy amount of money. And recently he's looked good. 6 innings in each of his last 4 starts with no more than 2 earned runs allowed. You can't put Carlos Rodon in there because of his contract. So then it leaves you with Clark Schmidt or Luis Heel. And like you said, it's just crazy to me that you would be taking Luis Heel out of your rotation. This guy's a 2.79 expected ERA, 180 expected batting average right now, hard hit rate under 30%, K rate above 30%. Like this guy has been a flat out superstar this year, and to take him out of your rotation to me is bonkers. If I'm them, this guy doesn't deserve it either. It's Clark Schmidt most likely, because you have to probably take between Luis Heel and Clark Schmidt. Clark Schmidt's expected exit velocity and hard hit rate percentage or hard hit percentage are both down. His expected ERA is still sub 4, career high K rate. But I feel like when it's all said and done, Clark Schmidt will be the one to go and not Luis Heel. Just my thoughts, just because of Heel has been that dominant recently.
I think you're probably right. But I think the other part of this is that we're still maybe a few weeks away from Cole coming back, and it might just be whoever is the hot hand at the time. Like if Clark Schmidt or Heel have 1 or 2 clunkers in the next 2 weeks, like I think this is the time when it will be decided. Because I agree with you, Rodon is making a stupid amount of money, and he's been good. Like he is way, way overperforming based on what you're looking at with the XFIPs and the Sierras of the world. He's not the same pitcher as he was during the height of his dominance. I don't think anybody really thinks he is. Stroman is high maintenance. You know, I wouldn't even want to see the tweets he would send out if they put him in the bullpen. That would be a shitstorm for all shitstorms, and it's not going to happen. Yeah. And Nestor is, I don't think he's going in the pen either. There's still a bit of pedigree there. So it's Schmidt or it's Heel, and it's brutal. It's brutal. That's going to be one of these guys unless there is, injuries happen, whatnot. But I think it might be Schmidt. I think it's definitely one of those two, but it's definitely a tricky question to answer at this point. And I don't think there's a definitive answer just based on how well they've done. But if one of these guys, specifically one of those two guys, gives up 7 earned runs next time out, and then it's 4 or whatever, then it'll make the Yankees decision a lot easier. But whoever does leave the rotation, I would imagine they do eventually get back, whether it is through spot starts or through an injury or through whatever. Because Cole will be okay for the first while, but I'm not so sold on these pitchers with elbow injuries avoiding the knife. The Bradishes of the world, the McKenzies of the world. historically, I don't know how successful that is. I'm not looking at data, but it does make me nervous when they elect to forego the surgery and try and rest. I don't know how confident I am in Bradish or McKenzie or Cole staying healthy and not eventually needing surgery. What do you think about guys who elect to not have the Tommy John surgery? Does that usually make, or the brace procedure or whatever it is? Does that tend to make you a little more nervous when they come back and you're just waiting for that piano to fall on your head, kind of thing?
You said it exactly right. Yeah, like if at this point in the game, with how hard pitchers throw and just the violence of pitching, it's a matter of when and not if to me. And I know there are some examples, and like you said, I don't have it in front of me that of pitchers that have foregone it and then have been able to go on and pitch. But most of the examples, I think, if they end up foregoing it, it just ends up delaying the inevitable at this point. And to me, like that is a huge, huge red flag to me. And in that way, with Cole doing this, like it could work itself out where, yeah, like he does come back and um maybe the injury pops up again and he has to go under the knife. But I'm with you 100%. It definitely to me is like, when is the other shoe falling? When is he gonna actually need surgery? Like to me, I would be shocked at this point if it doesn't go that route. And I get it for him because it's like I don't want to wait a year to come back, but I think you're
Yeah.
just delaying the inevitable at that point.
At this stage of his career, for sure. And if he is able to get through this year healthy, it's not going to make me that much more confident of him long term. So he'll be a fade for me in 2025, probably regardless. I just, I forget, is he 33, 34, just dealing with that underlying problem. He's probably not going to be somebody I land on a lot next year, if at all. But I kind of pushed off something you mentioned earlier about pitchers and how well pitchers have done. The ball looks to be completely dead. And I was gonna, frame it as what have been the big surprises. And I was just gonna say, like, the big surprise for me has been the emergence of so many incredible pitchers where it seems like I'm writing up guys every single night that are probably worthy of roster spots. Mitchell Parker is a big one that's popped up for me recently. He's been amazing. 8 starts and he's dominated Houston, the Dodgers, Atlanta. And he's like 20% rostered on Yahoo because there's just so many of these guys. That's been the big surprise for me. It's just how little offense we're seeing. I'm looking at my team and it's 1 for 17 for the day. And then there's 3 wins and a .7 ERA on the other side of it. That's kind of a common theme for me this year, is just no offense. Is that something that stands out to you, or what has been your big surprise that you've seen so far this year, if it's something different than that?
Yeah, I think the lack of elite hitting right now, just all these kind of hitters that have just, not performed what we've expected, and just like you said, the pitchers that have kind of come out of nowhere. It's like all of a sudden Jack Flaherty looks like the best Jack Flaherty we've seen. Like,
Yeah.
Jared Jones looks like an absolute ace. Even just an example of somebody today that pitched with the Rays. His name just totally just blanked out of my head right now. Zach Littell. Zach
Oh,
Littell, last time I checked, had gone 6 innings with 7 strikeouts and hadn't allowed an earned run. Like, he's balling out. You have a couple pitchers for the Nationals balling out right now. Like, um, is it the ball? Is it just because it hasn't fully warmed to summer yet? Like, I don't know what the answer is, but the lack of offense has, I think, been most.
it's kind of counterintuitive too with all the pitchers we've lost this year. You know, I think you may
Mhm.
have cut out. Are you there? Did you cut out? No, yeah, you're there. I thought you cut out for a second. With all
Yeah.
the pitchers we've
Yeah.
lost this year, you would assume that ERAs would have gone up across the league because more teams are using guys who probably aren't worthy of major league rotations. But there was a great thread today from James Shiano, who is part of the Mets Up podcast, and he does work at, I believe, NBC and Pitcher List. And he posted the league ERA last year at this time and what it is this year, and it was like 4.3, and it's gone down to 3.8 or 3.9 for the league wide ERA to be that. It's pretty astounding. Most of my teams across fantasy are doing very well pitching wise, but then the hitting is just awful. And it's tricky. Like, whenever I see somebody send me a question about a trade, it's like, should I trade this pitcher for this hitter? Should I trade whoever for
Mhm.
Austin Riley or for who? It's like almost always right now it's yes, because there is such a high level of replacement value pitching available in almost every league. And if you're able to get like an Austin Riley or a struggling Julio or whoever it is for one of these pitchers, like that's okay because there's going to be 6 guys with a sub-3 ERA sitting on your waiver wire. And it's not just the ERAs, like the supporting numbers for a lot of these guys look really good too. Like even Tyler McGill today, like 7 shutout against the Dodgers. It's just these crazy, and I've loved Tyler McGill for a long time. But these guys that you don't really expect to pop up, just having these great outings, great seasons, and it's kind of devalued pitching as a whole for me a little bit, which is crazy because I'm usually the guy
Mhm.
who's looking for these pitchers and streaming off my bench. But I'm looking at a lot of my leagues, and there's pitchers that are worthy of roster spots, especially because in 15 team NFBC, like everybody's rostered who's worth a damn mostly. But in these 12 teamers, there is just so much stuff on the waiver wire. 10, 12 teamers. That's been a huge, huge surprise for me. I did not expect that, especially after seeing all these pitcher injuries to start the season. But I do want to talk, unless you have another point there, I do want to talk about some of the regrets we have. Do you got anything else to add about the injuries, Mendy, before we move on?
No, I mean, it was just, again, like you mentioned, surprising with the high-end pitcher injuries that we had, Spencer Strider topping the list, and that kinda just being shocking, but then it's also like, are you gonna be more gun shy of taking the guys that throw hard, like Paul Skeens next year? Like, I'm sure if he continues the trajectory he's on, he's gonna be a top 3 or 4 round pick.
Yeah.
Are people gonna be like, "It's just a ticking time bomb, and I'm not, you know, gonna even mess with that?" Because I think Strider kind of struck fear in people with that, and so I think that's going to be the interesting thing going into next year. Will be the pitching injuries and waiting on pitching, and just trying to get a bunch of those guys later on, like the Flahertys, like the Jones, like the a bunch of those other guys, like Chris Sale was kind of like that guy this year. I know we'll talk about him later. Shota Imanaga. These surprises that just trying to get enough of those guys later on where you're not taking as much risk.
Yeah, Garrett Crochet is another one that kind of came out of nowhere, and
Mhm.
he'll probably have some limitations this year, but like could be looking at a potential ace going forward that just kind of came pretty much out of nowhere. I think Hunter Green is the last guy who's left. I think it was Eno who populated that list of the top 10 velocities from last year, fastball velocities, and 9 of them have had some kind of elbow procedure. McClanahan and Alcantara, and just like they're all gone. So it's definitely tricky. But then at the same time, you got like John Means had an elbow injury the other day, so it's like damned if you throw hard, damned if you don't throw hard. It's very tricky to
Yeah.
figure out who is going to be healthy. There's been a couple other guys who aren't really fire flamethrowers who've also gotten hurt. So it's just like a, throw darts at the wall and just, use that to determine who to pick next year for all we know. But I do want to talk a little bit about the main part here. The main reason I brought Sean to talk about, well, I mean, it's always just, we can talk about whatever and I have a good time, but I did want to talk about some draft day regrets, of which I have many. Is there a certain player or players that you regret drafting the most, guys, when you look at your player shares pages? They're just staring at you at the top and you're thinking, oh my God, why do I have 5 shares of, for me, it's like Jeff McNeil and draft and holds, and Jorge Polanco I got a lot of. Alejandro Kirk was a bad one. I think Hunter Brown probably is the cherry on top there. But let's hear from you. What do you regret doing at the table if you look back at your drafts and think I passed on this guy for that guy, etc.? What were the bonehead moves this year, Mendy?
Before we get into that, you actually made me think of something. Do you remember, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago now, I can't even remember, uh, when everybody was really excited for the 3 pitchers, like the next wave of aces, and it was Shane McClanahan, Alek Manoah, and Trevor Rogers, and they're like, "If you get any one of those 3, you're good." Like, these are the next 3, like, that got next, and they all went the same 3 in, like, ADP too. And it's just kinda crazy a couple of years later, 2 of them just outwardly have sucked, and then one of them, obviously, McClanahan was an ace when he was pitching, but, he went and had Tommy John, so it's like it's kinda wild that, like, just a few years ago, they were, like, the 3, like, if you're doing dynasty and you were going to take a pitcher, those were, like, the top 3 guys you were looking at because they were young and they looked like they had it, and now it's like all 3 of them right now they're not, they're pitching or they're just been horrible. So I think it's kinda interesting, just shows the landscape of pitching and what can happen over time.
How
But it just
hard it
made me
is.
think of that.
It's so hard to like. I feel for the dynasty guys that we're friends with. The Eric Crosses, the Cleggs, the Welshes, the James Andersons. Like making a list of pitching prospects is no easy task, and people will go back years later and say, "What about this?" Like it's impossible. It's really impossible. Manoah looked like a can't miss type of guy. Trevor Rogers won the Rookie of the Year, and he looked like he was going to be the
Mhm.
next big thing, and then awful. Like Manoah was a Cy Young finalist. Being a Toronto guy, I could talk about Manoah all day, but I don't. I don't need that heartache right now. Yeah,
Is
it's
Manoah the next Ricky Romero?
oh man, I remember having that pop up on my feed last year and just thinking like, oh, I hope it's not. He's shown more promise this year since he's come back. Like there's been a few like 7 scoreless recently. I think it was a couple scoreless outings. Then he followed it up with a bit of a stinker. I think it was Detroit. The stinker came. I hope he's not Ricky Romero. I don't know that I would put that necessarily on him, but we're not too far away from it. We're not too far away from it. I mean, another comp that was used, I think it's one more that Toronto fans used to console themselves, is Roy Halladay, because Roy Halladay came up to the majors originally, and if you look at his first year, it was brutal. He had to go down to the minors, and he worked with a famous pitching coach named Mel Queen in the late '90s, early 2000s, and then he came up, and then he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. The rest is history. Manoah came up and had success initially where Halladay didn't. So it's not like an exact one for one, but I think that's one that we just in Toronto here just kind of be like, oh yeah, he'll turn into Halladay eventually. But I don't know how seriously we actually think that. I think it's more of just we're praying. We're praying every night for that kind of thing to happen. Because Manoah looks pretty rough, all things considered. And I mean, even though he's looked better, he definitely doesn't look like the pitcher he was a couple of seasons ago. Um,
Yeah. Sorry to take
regrets,
away
Mandy.
from your other question, though.
No, I mean, like I said, we
to
could
get
we
back
could
to you.
talk about 6 irons for all I care on the show here, as long as I got my buddy back on the podcast. What are your big regrets? What are your big regrets from draft season, Mendy?
Hunter Brown was a big one. Um, I was frustrated too because right before the season started, we had a debate between Christian Javier and Hunter Brown on the Triple Play pod, and I was on the Christian Javier side. Granted, he's not killing it this year, but he pitched better than Hunter Brown
Yeah,
before this forearm stuff came up, and I was 100% on the Christian Javier side, and then I started hearing more things. I was like, I'm kind of torn now between 50-50 between them. Like I'm like, maybe I'll just take whoever's lower in ADP, and I'm kind of mad that I let myself get swayed that way because I didn't like Hunter Brown at the end of last season. I felt like he was batting practice, and uh, I was never impressed with his stuff. You always hear the Verlander comparisons, and I think that kind of paints a picture in your head. But there's a lot of holes in his game that he needs to work on. So Hunter Brown was a big one. Tim Anderson, you did list, also was a big one. I think people were hoping for the bounce back in Miami away from the White Sox, and I think I just saw last night he just made 2 errors in the same inning, and it cost them the game. Um, just absolutely brutal. I'm going to give you a name that I have in all my leagues, and again, I'm not in as many this year, and I regret it because he's not as good as I was hoping, and the inconsistency has been frustrating, and that's Michael King. Um, again, like you look at his numbers overall, they're not horrible, but there were players that were going in his range and after him that had been a lot more consistent. And I really liked Michael King going into the year. And he has been just, you almost are like, you're at the point now where you're kind of looking at the matchups and you're kind of like, is it worth the headache of starting him? And I didn't think that would be the case going into this year. So he's one of highly drafted player of mine. And he hasn't been as set it and forget it as I would have liked. So he's definitely been one of my biggest regrets in that regard as well. Nico Horner has been okay, but definitely not what I was expecting, especially the stolen base aspect has not been what I've wanted. Yeah, man, I would say those are probably the top of my head, the biggest ones. Um, but yeah, I would say that was probably the group. But your McNeil and Kirk as well, I know have been absolutely brutal.
those are like especially McNeil. That was more draft and hold rosters. I did a lot of the NFBC 50s this year. Me and Will Garofalo hopped into a bunch of those together, and they're like a low price point. They're fun. They help you learn the player pool. And I don't know if I'm going to do as many of them next year. Just looking at how these have gone so far, they are still fun. But like Jeff McNeil, I just thought it was like a late source of batting average. I just assumed that the batting average, he's always been about 300, close to it anyway. And I figured you're getting that. You're getting low end double digit homers and steals. He's hitting in the top / middle of what was supposed to be a better lineup than what we've seen for sure. And that one has stunk. Alejandro Kirk like a year ago when we were looking at preseason projections in 2023, Kirk had some of the best projections I've ever seen from a catcher. They were incredible, and he's just completely fallen short of that. And now with Danny Jansen healthy and doing what Danny Jansen's batting second every day in Toronto. He is fully in the circle of trust, and now he's getting 2 out of every 3 days as opposed to what was
Mhm.
happening before where they were splitting time. So Kirk isn't playing, and he's not playing well when he is. But Hunter Brown, I think, is probably my biggest miss of the season. I mean, I faded Ellie, and that can be talked about. We'll talk about those ones a little bit later. But in terms of guys that I drafted a lot of, like we mentioned a lot of the ERA estimators on the show, xERA, and there's FIP, and there's Sierra and xFIP. The ones that I tend to look at more closely than the others are xFIP and Sierra. And Hunter Brown was really solid in both of those last year. 352 xFIP. He had a 374 Sierra. And his strikeout minus walk rate was fantastic. Despite having an ERA over 5, you're looking at an 18.5 strikeout minus walk rate. The Ks have not been there. The command, which was always a little shaky, has now just disappeared completely. It's 12% walk rate. He's allowing a 300 batting average against. It's been really bad for Hunter Brown. Now, he does have these moments where you're thinking, oh, okay, like there's something here. And I think in 15-team leagues, you probably still hold on to him, but it's been really, really tough. But to go to another guy you mentioned, Michael King. The tough part about Michael King is that we've seen some really good starts from him, and as a whole, his ERA is 4.09. The problem is that you don't ever know when to start him. He had a good start
Mhm.
against the Marlins yesterday, and I couldn't believe it because every time he faces a bad team, they seem to rock him around. And then he goes and he 7 shutout against the Dodgers with 11 strikeouts. And you're thinking, what the hell do I do here? Do I sit him against the bad teams and start him against the good teams? I almost was inclined to tell people to sit him against Miami because of the pattern, but you couldn't. Like, I mean, Miami is just so incompetent. I'd start one of us against Miami, but it's been very, very tricky to know when to put Michael King into your lineups. And I also down the stretch here, I don't know. Do you worry about how many innings he's going to throw in the second half? He's thrown, I think, 107 is his career high. Do you think once we get to the 120, 130 range, the Padres will start to slow things down with him a little bit and maybe he won't be like we talked earlier about head-to-head playoffs. Is he somebody once we get to head-to-head playoffs we may not see a lot of? Is that something that you think is a possibility?
100% his first full season as a starter. And like you mentioned, just I think they say to, safely project maybe 50 more innings than the year before, 30, 40, 50 innings. So especially if the Padres aren't in contention at that point, like if they find themselves outside the playoff race, why would you risk him and shut him down? He'll be just like another guy that I know you mentioned him earlier, Gerrit Crochet. He'll be another like Gerrit Crochet will be that too. And he's going to get shut down. He's I think I have to double check. I'm pretty sure he's pitched like less than 50 major league innings already. So like, that's a problem. Both those guys to me, if Michael King goes out there and throws 3 great outings in a row, and Gerrit Crochet right now, I think he's right now as good a value as he's going to get. Those are 2 guys I'd be looking to move if you can, because like you mentioned, the inning concerns I think are big for both of them. Um, and there's nowhere for them to go but down, I think, at this point. So I think those are 2 of the best sell high guys you can do.
With Crochet, it was interesting seeing him pitch against Toronto the other night. He had 6 shutout innings and he was at I think 83 pitches, 83 or 85. And I was kind of expecting them to send him back out for another inning, but the White Sox did something smart, which is probably the only time I'll say that on the show this year. They didn't send him back out there, and I think that that's probably going to be how I hope that's how we see them use Garrett Crochet. I have a lot of shares, and I'm hoping that we just see abbreviated outings as opposed to
Mhm.
an IL stint or a shutdown or something along the lines where he's not pitching at all. I hope that they're smart and they just use him in short spurts. Kind of what I'm hoping for with Skeens, with Jared Jones, that they don't just send him back down because these guys should be pitching. It's just a matter of being smart with how they use them. But yeah, there's a lot of regrets in terms of who we did draft. In terms of who I didn't draft, I mentioned Ellie De La Cruz. That's probably the biggest one for me, just in terms of value and in terms of high profile nature of the player. Second round pick. I couldn't do it. I couldn't click the button in the second round. In my home league, he was still there in the third, and I was thinking, okay, he's going to fall to the fourth. His ADP is like in the 40s here on Yahoo. And then somebody snatched him up in the third. So I have 0 shares of Ellie. I'm not sure about you. Was he a fade for you heading into the season?
In the second round, he was. Anything outside the second round, I was trying to take him, but and on NFBC that wasn't available. He was a second round pick firmly on NFBC, and yeah, I regret missing him. Actually, it's very funny. Like on the show sheet you sent me, you listed three. I tried to look more in depth on it, but the first three guys you listed, Shota Imanaga, Ellie De La Cruz, and Chris Sale, are the three players I found myself kicking myself. I don't have any of them. I do have 75% exposure to Mason Miller, so I was very much in on him, and I'm happy I have him in most of my leagues. So that I'm very happy. But like, man, I was big on Yamamoto. I had him as a top 5 pitcher going into this season, and I didn't do enough digging in on Imanaga. And is Imanaga a sub 1 ERA pitcher? Probably not. But is he probably going to finish the year with, at the very worst, probably a sub 3 ERA at this point, or maybe like a sub 5 ERA with about a strikeout per 9? Like, yeah. And I'm just kind of mad at myself. I didn't even take a chance on him. And Chris Sale too. Like Chris Sale, we know when he's been healthy, he's been a stud, and it's just been his health. But like, he's healthy right now and he's balling, and he wasn't, expensive either. So those three you hit kind of for me, like on the head. I'm like, those are the three I look at. I'm like, how did you not even consider any of these three?
Mason Miller kills me because on my old show on Fantasy MLB Today, the most viewed episode ever, and I think one of my favorite episodes ever, was with Nick Pollock. And it was Mason Miller's debut, and we were watching it live and we were reacting to it live. And we were both kind of just like, holy shit, like this guy's different. This isn't your average pitcher that gets called up. This guy is serious. And then I chose to not draft him at all this year after really, really liking him. I think I was worried that I wasn't sure about what the role was going to be. He was going to be a 7th or 8th inning guy. This was probably, in hindsight, it feels really stupid, but I was like, is he going to be a closer? They got Jimenez, who's not bad. Lucas Erceg, who I actually really like, and that was the guy I was drafting in Oakland, was Lucas Erceg, and I have a bunch of shares of him on draft and hold rosters, and he's been really good. But Mason Miller, I mean, I'm going to get myself in trouble. He's arguably the best pitcher in baseball on a per inning basis right now. Every time he goes out there, it's appointment viewing. You drop what you're doing and you turn on the TV or you turn on the computer and you watch him because it's 3 strikeouts. And like it was that game of a couple weeks ago where he struck out Judge and Soto, and he made them look like JUCO hitters who'd never really seen pitching before. And I've just been absolutely blown away by Mason Miller. So that one's a big miss, but I am definitely with you on Imanaga, Ellie, and Chris Sale. Like I have none of any of them. And I think with Sale, it was the injury risk. I figured, okay, he's going to be great for 60 innings. And then it's going to be the same story as always with Chris Sale. But I think something that's kind of important that I didn't do enough due diligence on is that with Sale, it's not really been one thing. It's not like he always has an elbow injury. It's not like it's always the shoulder. It's just random stuff with him that pops up that keeps him out. And that's a concern in and of itself. But it's not like his elbow is hanging by a thread or there's no meniscus left in his knee or something. Like, it's just random stuff. And while that can still be a factor, I don't think it's as likely that he's going to get hurt based on that. That it could be anything, sure, but it's not a situation where we're just waiting for something to happen. Imanaga, I don't have anyone to blame but myself. From what I heard, he was a slightly lesser version of Kodai Senga, and I thought, okay, he's going in like the 150s to 170 type of range, which at this point feels like an absolute steal. But I just wasn't ready to pay that price for such an unknown. I think we have it's so hard to know what we don't know, which sounds really stupid, but like these prospects, the Jackson Holidays, the Wyatt Langfords of the world, we expect them to come up and be great, and we have no idea how to project them. And even projection systems, I think, struggle a lot of the time. The bat hates rookies. It's not a Derek thing personally. He doesn't hate the rookies himself, but they never score well on the bat probably because there's just not a lot of data, and it's very hard to know. And I think it's the same thing with guys who come from Japan or from Korea or from Cuba or wherever, that we just don't know. And sometimes what we don't know is going to kill us like this with Imanaga, where you don't have any shares. He'll come back to earth, but I think he'll still be very good. How worried are you about Wrigley Field and the friendly confines once things get warm? I know he's gotten by on some low homer per nine luck, low homer per fly ball luck a little bit, and I don't know how much I want to use the word luck because he has been really good. But is this a situation where, like, would you be trying to sell Imanaga? I think he's going to be good, but like we were mentioning peak value before with guys like Crochet, I think Imanaga is never going to be worth more than he is right now. If you can trade him for a Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns type, hypothetically speaking, would you do it?
100%. If I could
Yeah.
get one of those guys for sure. I mean, like you said, Imanaga is not going to get better than this. Like you can't do better than a sub 1 ERA. Like that's to me you're at the 100% outcome that you can get. Like there's nowhere to go but down for Imanaga. And like we were saying, he still can be very very good. But, he could go out there, go 5 innings, give up 4 earned runs, and that ERA is up to probably like 1.8, you know? Um, I think, right now his expected ERA is 2.62. I think he finishes this year probably as like, between a 2.5 and 3 ERA. Like I think that's about right, which is a great pitcher. But I think right now you've gotten the best of him. How long is that going to continue? Like you said, when the warm weather goes in there, um, that's where I'm like, a 39.4% hard hit rate. Like that's some of those balls are going to get out. K rate is good. Walk rate is good. Exit velos are about average. Like he's a great pitcher based on what he's doing so far, but there is regression that is coming. I just think not insane regression, but there is some regression coming. If you can turn him into round 1 or round 2, round 3 pitcher, like a Corbin Burns, like a Zach Wheeler, like those guys, like yes, I'm 100% doing that for sure.
That might be shooting a little high, but I mean, he has a .84 ERA, .91 WHIP. I see some crazy trades. I'm sure you probably get some DMs sometimes where you see a trade that went down and you're like, really? Like, I know I've mentioned this a few times recently on the show, so I'm sorry if you heard it already, but I was going through the Yahoo public trades. There's this feature on Yahoo where you can see public trades made. If you look up Acuna today, you can see trades or whoever. And somebody was able to net Randy Rosarena for Kevin Pillar straight up 1-for-1 when Pillar was lighting the world on fire. And it just goes to show, like, I don't know how serious that league is, but crazy shit happens in fantasy. If you can turn Imanaga into an ace, a legit ace, because another thing that's going to happen is there's going to be more of a book on him the more he pitches in Major League Baseball, and teams are going to know the little tips and tricks that maybe he is still sneaking by them through his first 10 starts. I think it's been 10 starts at this point. So as the league sees him more, specifically the teams he plays frequently, they're going to probably get to him a few times. And that is something that you're going to have to take into account. Obviously, he's not going to be this good forever. If you could get Sonny
I've,
Gray
got a
for
name.
him,
I've got a name for you.
you got a name? I was going to say Sonny Gray. What's your name?
Pablo Lopez.
Oh, the massive underperforming Pablo Lopez.
If
Yeah,
I'm in your league and I say I'll give you Pablo Lopez for him, what are you doing?
I'd probably take Lopez. I think I would take Lopez. I think that probably would not be a popular opinion right now, but the underlying skills are still very good for Lopez. Like the only thing that looks different is the ERA. Everything else looks fine. I was looking at him the other day, and I don't want to speak incorrectly here, so I'm going to pull up the Fangraphs page as I, pause for time here and just fill the void as I pull up this page. I'm pretty sure we're seeing some career bests from Pablo Lopez. So his walk rate at 4% is the lowest it's ever been. 23.7 K minus walk is also right now the lowest we've ever seen from him in his career. Same with the 305 xFIP. That's a career best to this point. And the Sierra at 297 is also the best mark of his career. So those are a lot of things that I usually look at, the typical benchmark, the pitch, the ERA estimators, strikeout minus walk. Those are all
Mhm.
really, really good for him. He's only got a 63% strand rate, which has not been helping him, and he's allowing a lot of homers, which I don't know if that's something that I expect to
Yeah.
continue at this rate. 1.65 homer 9 when his career is 1.1. That's probably going to come back down to earth. I think you could probably, if you're trading Imanaga, get Lopez and then something else on the side. And I think that would be a really smart thing to do. As much as it would feel weird to do it, like sending away Imanaga, who is every time out on like perfect game watch, for a guy who's getting lit up for 4 earned runs every time would be tricky. But I think it is a smart move in the long run. Are you taking that trade?
Yeah, I am. I would be kicking myself if Imanaga starts regressing and Pablo Lopez is the best pitcher in baseball over like a 2-3 week stretch, and it's like the classic buy low, sell high type of thing. Even though Imanaga is still going to be good, but that's the type of return I think I would need to get, like Pablo Lopez, like Luis Castillo, um, those type of players. Like those would be the only type of pitchers I'm looking to get for him. I don't even think Sonny Gray would be for me enough. I would need one of those, like give me like, yeah, like no one's gonna probably give me Wheeler um or Burns. Another name maybe like Aaron Nola. Like that's like in that Pablo Lopez tier for me, where I'm like, I'm probably doing it, but it's closer. But like those are the type of pitchers I would need to move him.
What if somebody was offering you one of the studs in Pittsburgh who have their own concerns, mostly about innings? If you're getting Jared Jones or Skeens, hypothetically, would you do one of those for Imanaga?
Hmm. I I'm probably not, just because I know that there's going to be inning limits for both of them.
Yeah.
I know for sure with Skeens, and I'm pretty sure Jared Jones will probably have one too. I didn't get that sense that Imanaga has one. And
Yeah.
also the Cubs are also going to be competing for a playoff spot. I don't expect the Pirates to continue to compete for a playoff spot by the end of the season, which means they probably will shut them down. So no, I think I would rather have Imanaga.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If it was no innings limit, I think I might go with one of those other guys. But yeah, the Pirates are gonna do weird things. Like Skeen stayed down a lot longer than he probably should have to begin with. I was surprised Jones started the year up and he's stayed up, but yeah, there are gonna definitely be problems there. Mendy, it's been great catching up with you. I've taken up a ton of your time here, but I really appreciate you carving out some of your evening to talk some baseball with me, brother.
Hey man, I appreciate you having me on the show. This was a blast, and really pumped that we got to pod together again.
Absolutely. I'm hoping to see you out in Arizona, but if not, we are definitely going to be talking at some point again throughout the year on a podcast or in the DMs or whatever. But I do want you to let the people know what's coming up and what's going on in your world.
Yeah, just check us out, Triple Play Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'll be back on weekly for the rest of the baseball season after the little time I had off. And usually like every Sunday, Monday night, I would say most of the time Sunday nights right before Fab runs, we got our show live on YouTube. So if you just search Triple Play Fantasy, you'll check it out. You'll see it on there. And then, yeah, just Twitter. I'm on there not as much as I used to be, but I do put, some stuff out every day. So if you want to check out, a lot of it's like betting related. I'm going to be diving a lot more into MLB betting right as the NBA wraps up. I try to keep it each season as it's going. So it'll be baseball betting pretty much the next 3 months. So if you also like baseball betting, just follow me on Twitter.
Go check him out at dmendy02, one of the best, one of the nicest guys in the business. And make sure you're checking out Triple Play Fantasy Baseball Podcast. There's a lot of good stuff on that feed, and check out the YouTube as well, so you can see the beautiful faces of everybody on the show. We got Marty, we got Cheesecake, we got Eric, we got everybody. I don't want to miss anybody. And sometimes I miss up Doc, and Doc is Cheesecake, right?
So Cheesecake is
No,
is art, and
no,
then
Cheesecake is
Doc is
Art and
Eric.
Doc is Eric, right? Okay, see, this is why I need to clarify
Yeah.
sometimes. The nicknames get me. The nicknames really get me. It's a great show. It's a great group of guys. I've been lucky to join them on a pod before, and they're really, really worth spending some time with. But I will leave you guys there. It's the second podcast we've done today. You've heard plenty enough out of me. If you want to see more, you can check me out over on Twitter at Joe Orico99. We'll be back again tomorrow to wrap up everything on the Tuesday slate. But until then, everybody, take care and have a great night.